ask you about this because one of the fascinating things when I was reading your account in Nepal was, I mean, you've actually got on the cover of the book there, you're taking a photograph of what were kind of like spirits or ghosts or something. Now, I'm sitting there thinking, now wait a minute, what's going on here? Am I now in an episode of The Ring or one of these Japanese ghost horror stories, or is Alan saying there are ghosts and this is real? And the same with, and I'm interested in your traditional medicine stuff, because obviously that's quite controversial over in, kind of a lot of people think of it in terms of quackery and this sort of stuff, but clearly you've got a lot of respect for it, and clearly a huge vast amount of the population have got. So personally, you have you now come to accept the, if you like, rather strange and metaphysical claims of these religions, like there are these spirits, beyond just accepting that this is what people believe, but that actually there are these things that does that make sense?
Well, there are several interesting questions there. The first is just the simpler, which is the Eastern religion, Eastern medicine, medical traditions of Ayurvedic and other medicines of India and China. I really can't understand, apart from professional wanting to monopolize the market, why there is so much resistance among traditional Western doctors and others to Eastern medicines. I mean, you can understand why they want to hog the market, but I've tried these things and they work.
Right.
I mean, give one example. In China, in a remotish area, I was on a tour with one of my students, and they slammed a door of a van on my finger, and the whole thing was swelling up and blackening and so on. They rushed off to a shop and got some traditional medicine ointment, put it on, and within 10 minutes, the swelling was going down and the black was going. And I have it in a cupboard here, and I've given it to myself when I bang myself, and I've given it to others, and it works. I've got some what they call dog skins. I don't think they are dog skins, which are patches, which if you have a pain in your back or anything, you put one of them on, and it goes. I have cold medicine, which is much better than any Western cold medicine. Tea, ginseng, all these things. Tea is the most important.
Tea's a huge thing for you, though, isn't it? I mean, you may.
Let's come back to tea later.
Yeah.
We'll jot it down for future.
Yeah, we must talk about tea, because I mean, we could do an hour on tea, I think.
Yeah. So they work very well for certain things, not everything. But so why be so stupid as to throw away 5,000 years of cumulative knowledge in half the world's population, and just because we had a pretty pathetic medical history until the later 19th century, when we could see what we were doing. Now the spirits, everyone usually comes out with Shakespeare. There are many more things, many things that are undreamt of in your philosophy or whatever it is, the famous
Hamlet thing.
Yeah. Basically, one of the reasons I stopped being a Christian was that I never felt Christ come into my heart. So I've never had the experience of the inner presence of what I was promised. And I've never experienced any kind of spiritual presence of any kind. So my attitude towards it is exactly my attitude towards God, which is based on when I think Bertrand Russell or Whitehead was asked what he thought the greatest invention of the 20th century was. He said, the suspended judgment. It wasn't an invention. I mean, it's an earlier invention, and it's one of the great inventions. But the point really is that science, as any scientist knows, is not a matter of knowing something as certain. It's positing a hypothesis which is true until it's proven false. And so you suspend judgment on its ultimate truth. And the same is my attitude to the world. I don't know that God exists, and I don't know that he doesn't exist. It's a suspended judgment. And so when I encounter examples of spirits, and I'll just give you one or two cases, I do what Kuhn suggests. I mean, he doesn't properly suggest it. He suggests that paradigms exist, and then the number of discrepancies or ambiguities or threats to them accumulate so much that finally they're toppled. Now, if that's how you change a paradigm, what you should do is, instead of brushing them aside, you should just put them in a box, in a pending tray, which I have beside me. So you put it there, you don't understand the answer, you suspend the judgment in your suspended pending tray. And then the next one comes along, you put it in there, and then there may be a pattern emerges in the pending tray. So a few things in my mental pending tray. I think we'll start with Sarah and the spirits, because that, I think, comes before the photograph. In the village in Nepal, it's believed that when a person dies, they don't go off immediately to the village of the dead, Planasa. They linger around in the village, their spirits linger around, and then they have to be taken along the path to the village of the dead through a 3-day ritual. So they're hovering there, and they're a bit dangerous at that point, because if they've had an unpleasant death, or their ancestors, their descendants don't remember them, then they can cause trouble. Anyway, a very close friend of ours, the man with whom we'd stayed on our first 2 returns to Nepal, and my classificatory uncle, I called him Uncle Ateba, and I was fond of him. And he lived in a house 30 yards above mine. And one day, he was elderly, he died. And normally the body would be taken down to the river straight away and burnt by the river. And that would partly cool the presence of the spirits, but it was terrible monsoon rain, and it's a sheer cliff down which you have to go, and it would have been very dangerous to take him down. So they didn't, and they left him in the house. And that night, Sarah woke me at about 3 a.m. and tapped me and said, "Alan, can you see those faces up there?" And the bedroom we were in was, we'd had the little house built, and they'd built a house, and about 6 feet above our head was a bamboo framed, a bamboo sort of mat as the ceiling. It wasn't far above us. We were lying looking up at this thing. And I said, "No, I can't see any faces." And she said, "Well, they look like elderly women, but they look strange because their mouths have fallen in and they don't have teeth. They look as if they're dead. There are 3 or 4 of them. They're sort of looking down at me like a sort of set of mirrors in a disco, the different angles." And I said, "Are you sure you can see them?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Are you sure you're awake?" And she said, "Yes, I'm awake." And I tapped her a few times, and I said, "Let's talk about something else." And we talked about something else, and she was clearly awake. I said, "Can you still see them?" And she said, "Yes." So I went across and opened the blinds, and it was still pretty dark. And I looked at the watch, and I came back and I tapped her. "They're still there?" "Yes." They went on for an hour or so. And then dawn started, seeped through the window, and there was a cockerel crowing. And she said, "They're going." And they faded away. Now that happened to her once, and once or twice afterwards, she said, I felt they were wanting to come on other occasions, but I didn't want to see them and I pushed them away. The sequel was that we went into the house above where my closest gurung friend, my sister, adopted sister, lived. And I was very, very close to her, Dilmaya. And so at breakfast, she said, how are you? And we said, fine. But we had a strange experience and we expected her to be shocked. And Sarah described what she'd seen. And Dilmaya said, oh, yes, yes. That was the spirits of Ateba's dead wives. He'd been married several times. They'd come down to get him, fetch him. You know, that's to be expected. So that was the first Gurung experience. The second was when at Dilmaya's, she died tragically young, and at her 3-day funeral, at one point they have a ritual where she's being taken off to the land of the dead, and they bring in a sheep, which is got her spirit inside. So they feed her food, and they brush her with her comb, and they show her in the mirror. And I filmed all this, and I was her classificatory brother, so I had to do these things with Sarah. And they believe that the sheep inside her, and there's another sheep, which is her friend, also has a spirit inside. The sheep will eat this food, and then they go off and they sacrifice the sheep and examine its insides. And they believe that the sheep, the spirit having eaten the food, there will be no remains of it. It's just gone straight in, and it consists of biscuits and orange peel and, you know, durable things and cigarette wrappings and things, but there won't be any trace of them. So while I was filming with one camera, I sent my MPhil student Tech to go off and watch them doing this and to take photographs and films of it. He did that, and I said, what did you see? And he said, yes, there was nothing there. And he took photographs. So within half an hour, it had all disappeared. The third example, in fact, I'll give you 4 since it's quite interesting to get them on film. The third one was the photograph. I was acting head of department on the first day in our department. I was busy and setting up things, and a young man who turns out to be the Marquis of somewhere, but he was then an undergraduate at Newcastle University, and he came and said, Professor Macfarlane, I've been to the village next to yours, Yanjikot, and I went to a ritual there done by some shamans, and I took some photographs, and there's something puzzling about them. Could I show them to you? And so I said, fine. And he projected them, and photograph number 20 was a row of 3 shamans doing a very, very powerful ritual for a dead spirit that is refusing to go and is being attacked by witches, and to fight away the witches and so on. The shaman has to go into trance, beat his drums, and then there's this almighty battle in which the shaman may be killed between the witches and the protecting ancestors and the protecting god of the shamans. And in trance, the shaman, who was a very close friend of mine and came to England and is now in England, is Yajung Kromje Pochu, he fights off these demons. Anyway, photograph 20 was him in this ritual. Photograph 21 was the one on the cover of the book, where you see these lights flashing down, yellow lights, green lights, and a rainbow. And photograph 22, taken just a second later, is normal. As I was showing this, by some awful chance, in walked Yajung, the shaman in the picture, looked at it and said, that's me. That's my spirits. The camera has got exactly what I see in my mind's eye when I am in trance. And I said, how can a camera capture spirits like that? He said, I don't know, but that's what I see. So I sent it back to Kodak, and they said, well, sometimes you get sunspots and sometimes the lens freezes and you get odd effects and so on. And I showed it to an expert on paranormal psychology, Nick Humphrey, and he said, well, you do get these things, but the chances of that happening at that moment in time is millions to one. So it's a highly improbable thing. But the same thing happened again. The same shaman came to Cambridge. He offered to give some of his precious objects to the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And the most precious was his father's drum, which is sacred, and he had to sleep with it in a certain position for a week before. And in the handing over ceremony to the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, he handed it over in this sort of hub of the museum in one of the rooms there. And as he handed it over in the presence of the MPhil students and the curators, all the lights in the museum fused, total blackness. And when they examined the circuits, they found that a huge electrical surge had struck in that room, the light above, and had fused all the lights in the museum. And then Sarah had another experience. I'll finish with that one. We had a student who sadly died recently, Vinay Srivastava, who was doing his doctorate in India on camel herders in Rajasthan who have shamans. And he'd taken photographs in there, and he came back, and Sarah was the only person in the department who knew how to, at that time, use our darkroom and develop photographs. So Vinay said, can you help me develop these photographs, Sarah? So they went into the darkroom. And while they were doing it, Vinay said, an odd thing about this was when I was photographing a group of people, there was a powerful shaman in them. And he said to me, I said, can I photograph you? And he said, yes, that's fine, but I won't come out in the photograph. There'll be a blank. So they developed the photographs together. And as it came into a picture, there was all the other people, and there was a blank where he was. So I've gathered a few other examples from other anthropologists who've had these extreme experiences.
There's a book in this in and of itself.
Yes, well, my Indian friend and publisher said, why don't we make the good anthropologist spook book, or book, like the good anthropologist cookbook, as there is. So who knows? But what I do is I put them in the pending tray.
Right.
They're not enough in themselves for me to throw away my whole Western philosophy and science. But if you think about it for a second, if we were here 200 years, 300 years ago, and someone had said, you are soon going to be sending pictures through the air and sound through the air, and you're going to be able to send huge forces that will drive everything around you through wires, electricity, and before the internet, and before Bluetooth, and before the internet. It would have been incredible. This is another dimension which you can't. So why do we, with the multiverses and multi-universes in modern physics and so on, what's to stop us saying that who knows whether there aren't a number of parallel realities and things within which all these spirits and things could make sense?